that I tend to graduate more often on Netflixed. What is that? A new movie service? Netflixed. From a Thrive convention. Some of the psychology. It was also a look into thy admit failure. Deal. Hey guys, welcome to BookBabeBeauty. My name is Erica and I love books and makeup. I especially love giving you guys a great review for a book that I just read while I do my makeup. So first of all, I just want to open up by saying that this is not the kind of book that may be suitable for all readers. I know I haven't done a review for a book like this before. In fact, I have yet to review a nonfiction book in a video at all. And it doesn't mean that I will do review videos like this all the time. But truthfully, I enjoy reading. So in my opinion, any book is fair game as far as videos are concerned. Obviously, the genre that I tend to gravitate toward more often is the romance genre. And there still is a good likelihood that the majority of my videos will feature those types of books. But as someone who just likes to be well-versed in all types of literature, this book is a true crime story. Not only is it about the crime that was committed, but it is in fact a pretty graphic retelling of the happenings before, during, and after the crime took place. It can be quite disturbing at times due to the sheer nature of the crime that was committed. But to ease any concerns that you might have, any of the graphic details that were portrayed in this book, I will not be sharing those with you on camera because I really want you to read this book if you decide that you can handle it. I consider myself a pretty open book as far as my own history, likes and dislikes, and even the evolution of my channel as things change. But I don't know if I've ever shared that I have always been the type of person that has secretly indulged in true crime documentaries, podcasts, and other YouTube channels that focus on crime as their content. When I'm putting makeup on the days that I'm not recording, typically I am tuned into those things just as a way to fill the silence and keep me, I hate saying this word because it's a terrible word choice, but entertained as I'm doing what I need to do when I put my makeup on. In fact, from an early age, I'd had my mind pretty made up that I wanted to be a forensic pathologist. I think I was actually in elementary school when I had been given a copy of a book called Dead Men Do Tell Tales, and I was just completely fascinated with the science behind discovering truth after a crime has taken place. And I think a lot of people in this day and age probably share in my interest of true crime stories, as you see them featured more often on Netflix, podcasts, and YouTube. So even though it may seem to you all that reviewing a book like this is so out of left field for me, it really isn't. I just don't talk about them at the same frequencies as I do with romance novels, because sharing a story about love is typically easier for the heart to hear. But I did feel compelled to tell you about this book because if you are a true crime aficionado like me, and this particular crime story struck a chord with you too, then I truly think that you will enjoy reading this. Because it's not just a retelling, it is also a psychological look into why it occurred and how warning signs might have been missed. So, now that I've said all that, I guess it's a good time to introduce the book featured in today's video. Today's book is called My Daddy is a Hero: How Chris Watts Went from Family Man to Family Killer. and it was written by Lena Derhally. And I apologize if I've mispronounced that name, but I tried. So today, since this book is a little bit different, a lot a bit different than what I normally review, as I'm putting on my makeup, I'm going to talk a little bit about the crime itself and a little bit of psychology behind the crime that was committed, as well as a little bit of information about the author who wrote this book. So with all of that said, I am ready to put on my makeup and let's get started. When the Chris Watts case first happened, I remember how, as it unfolded, I was pretty much glued to the news, wondering with everybody else, what the hell just happened? But I also remember being distinctly aware from day one that something just wasn't right. And I'm sure that I wasn't alone in that thought. But I just knew that no matter what the news had been reporting at that time, that he had done it. I was sure of it. And then as the story started to unfold even more, I was even more positive that he'd done it. I think we all were. As we watched the news cameras recording his pleas for his family to come home safely, and we noticed the lack of emotion behind his words. It was Monday, August 13th of 2018. When Shanann's friend, Nikki Atkinson, knew something wasn't right. She had known Shanann very well, and the fact that she wasn't answering any of Nikki's texts, especially after an emotional trip home from a Thrive convention, led her gut to tell her that something was amiss. Shanann had been 15 weeks pregnant, and she was due to go to an appointment that day, to which Nikki had previously offered to drive her to. But the normally social Shanann, who never wasted a minute texting back, was silent. And to Nikki, her silence was very unsettling because Shanann also had 3- and 4-year-old daughters named Cece and Bella, who were supposed to be at home with her. Not wanting to waste any time, thinking that Shanann may have passed out, or maybe she'd been sick due to her many autoimmune diseases, she'd called on the police to do a welfare check. Trying to be even more on the ball, Nikki thought it would be best to drive over there herself because she knew that Shanann had been grappling with emotional distress due to the fact that her marriage with Chris was troubled. During a 5-week visit to family in North Carolina, while Chris had stayed in Colorado, he'd expressed to Shanann that he no longer wanted the baby that she was carrying. This came as a shock to Shanann because Chris had seemed so excited when she announced her pregnancy to him. But this once devoted husband had grown completely cold and detached, and he no longer felt that he and Shanann were compatible. This information didn't just catch Shanann off guard, but everyone else who knew Chris had a hard time processing this sudden change in behavior. And Shanann, being the vivacious fighter that she was in life, was willing to do anything to save her marriage with Chris. Chris had actually been her second marriage, and the only marriage in which she had children. But Chris had really changed her views on relationships. Everything that she wasn't getting in her first marriage was everything that Chris had to offer and more. He was patient, he was selfless, he allowed her to be herself, and he showed her love in a way that no man had ever shown her before. He was truly her best friend. So there was no way that she was going to give up on her relationship with Chris, at least not without a valiant effort. But what she didn't know was while she was away during those 5 weeks in North Carolina visiting her family, was that Chris was leading a double life. I suppose the old adage of when the cat's away, the mouse will play couldn't have been more true in this story. Chris had met a woman named Nikki from work. Not Shanann's friend Nikki. I feel like I should mention that. But this Nikki seemed to be giving Chris all of the attention he felt like he wasn't getting from Shanann. After all, Chris had recently adopted a healthier lifestyle. He had implemented a workout routine and healthy eating that helped him shed a lot of the extra weight that he'd had when he first met Shanann. Of course, no one knew anything about this new female in Chris's life. So, when the police and Shanann's friend Nikki showed up to the Watts residence to do a welfare check, they were surprised when no one answered the door. In fact, there was no commotion inside at all. And that worried Nikki even more. Because although there had been the possibility that Shanann could have left the house with the girls, one look into the window above the garage confirmed that her car, including the car seats, were still there. Another friend, due to Nikki's persistence, had been in contact with Chris, trying to sort the whereabouts of Shanann and the two girls. But Chris was adamant that Shanann had mentioned taking the girls to a friend's house for a play date, and that's all he knew. There was absolutely no emergence on his part. In fact, he didn't seem to understand why everyone else was so worried. But he ended up showing up to the house moments after the police and Nikki arrived, showing his cooperation by allowing the police and Nikki to come in and inspect the residence for any signs of Shanann and the girls. Aside from Shanann's phone and her wedding ring being left at the house, there were no signs of them anywhere. The only thing that seemed out of place were the sheets that appeared to be stripped from the bed. However, they had no idea how evidentiary those missing sheets really were. I'm at a stopping point, so I'm going to go ahead and do my eyebrows off camera, and when I come back, I will talk a little bit more about the happenings of this crime story, and I will be right back. I'm back, and I'm ready to dig deeper into this story. In the days after the disappearance of Shanann, Cece, and Bella, Chris maintained his ignorance for their whereabouts. The only information that he'd offered up was the fact that his marriage with Shanann had been on rocky ground, and that they were presently trying to work through it. He affirmed the strong possibility that Shanann had left with the girls because she was mad. But as the media grabbed hold of the story, Chris's mask of innocence began to slip. Everyone who watched him make statements, including law enforcement that questioned him, noticed that he seemed void of emotion. They noticed that he seemed completely detached from the reality of the situation, and that there seemed to be no sense of urgency behind his pleas for a safe return. His carefully constructed alibi seemed to be falling apart, all while the whole world was watching. If not for the diligence of the law enforcement and the detectives working on the case, Chris might have been able to keep up the charade for a while. But when Chris agreed to the lie detector test, his label of potential suspect quickly turned into only suspect, and the rest of the story unraveled. While I'm not going to get into the details of the text exchanges, whereabouts, and murders, I will tell you that they are all illustrated in this book. This book did a really good job of not only including everything that was in the case discovery, but it was done in such a way that it illustrated the timeline of events in a way that sounded much like storytelling. It told of the days, weeks, and months before the murders. Then of the murders themselves and what happened after those murders took place. What you most likely know if you were following this story during the time that it happened, or even if you heard about it after the fact, was that Chris Watts did indeed annihilate his entire family. I mean, not only is that a hard pill of information to swallow, considering there seemed to be no warning signs aside from his change in behavior the few short weeks before the incident. But what's even harder to grasp is that we know now that he planned it. It wasn't blind rage, and it wasn't self-defense. It wasn't even the kind of rage that only a parent could have if their child was being harmed. Although Chris did initially try claiming that it was. What really happened was he quickly began to see, especially during those 5 weeks that he was a bachelor while his family was away, that Shanann and their 2 girls were merely a hurdle. In his eyes, they'd quickly become a roadblock in his path for getting the happiness that he truly wanted. The happiness that he'd found in a woman who wasn't Shanann. And if the act of killing them wasn't enough, the way that he'd disposed of the bodies, that was enough to chill you to the bone. With a total disregard to the people that his wife and children had once been. He tossed them away like proverbial trash, only caring enough to do it in the way that he did so that their bodies wouldn't be discovered, and far from doing it in a way that their lives would be honored. I'm going to go ahead and finish up my makeup off camera, but when I come back, I want to talk about the final facts of this case as well as some of the psychology behind the crime that occurred. I also want to share a little bit of information about the author that put this book together and spoke of this case in such an eloquent way, in a way that it did honor the victims, and in a way that it also took a psychological approach to it, so we as a society can maybe understand why something like this would happen. And on that note, I will be right back. I'm back. My makeup is done, and I am ready to talk a little bit about the psychology behind the Watts family murders. What I really appreciated about this book is that it wasn't just a retelling of the crime. It was also a look into the psychology behind it. Oftentimes when crimes occur, especially after something this horrific, we have a hard time wrapping our heads around the whys and the hows. Why did he do it? If he was so unhappy in his relationship with Shanann, why didn't he just divorce her like a normal person? How could a father kill his wife, let alone his own children? How did anyone not notice any warnings or red flags that would caution them to Chris's murderous abilities? And then, of course, we are left with the question of, can I even trust my own spouse? Especially after 8 years in a marriage with Shanann, he was able to maintain a mask that resembled that of a good guy and a good husband and a good father. I'm sure a lot of people watching this case unfold were left with the terrifying question of whether or not they could truly trust someone, as Shanann had truly trusted Chris. I mean, he was at one time, and for a long time in their marriage, her best friend, her rock, and her shoulder to cry on. She chose this man to have children with, and then she entrusted him with their care, naturally, as most mothers would. Never in her wildest dreams did she ever think he would harm her. most especially their children. This was a man that, although not a social butterfly like Shanann was, he was always willing to lend a helping hand. He was even there for Shanann in her most desperate time of need. And in fact, when he met her, she had been at her worst health-wise due to her newly discovered autoimmune diseases. Without question, he most definitely would have given someone else the shirt off his back. But as it may be, no one really knew Chris at all, because all of that nice guy exterior had all just been a mask. And after it slipped, the true monster that he was had been exposed. Not only was he capable of murder, but he was capable of murder 4 times. Shanann, Cece, Bella, and Nico were all innocent victims. And on top of that, he was capable of planning it, lying about it, and then trying to cover it up after the fact. He was likely capable of so much more than we could even fathom. It wasn't enough for him just to admit failure in his marriage, and it wasn't enough for him to separate from his relationship. In his mind, he needed to get rid of the problem that was his family completely, and well, he did. I've left out a lot of details, and I mean a lot of details, that were included in this book about the case. Because I think if you are interested in true crime stories, then this book is definitely worth reading and experiencing the horrifying discoveries for yourself. I also think that this book is so graphic in nature, as it included an almost visual retelling of the crime and the cover-up attempts. So I feel like it's not something that I should necessarily expose you to unless you choose to read it. As a mother myself, it was like reading my own worst nightmare. Of course, it was difficult to read about the murder of Shanann, who'd been carrying their unborn child Nico. But the cold-blooded killings of Cece and Bella just really struck a nerve with me. The author of this book is Lena Derhally. Lena is a licensed psychotherapist who is also certified in Imago relationship therapy. She has been interviewed in many different publications, has written many articles, and is the co-host of a psychology podcast where she lends her expertise behind the psychology of relationship problems. And according to her website, she also spends a lot of time and efforts raising money and awareness for children who have been afflicted by war. I think this senseless crime is a true example of why raising awareness about mental health is so important. A lot of what Lena had said during her psychological evaluation of the crime in this book was that mental health, especially in men, is seen as a weakness. Men are typically raised to think that when facing a problem, they should just suck it up, which in turn leads to a lot of repressed feelings that tend to resurface later in life. Allowing yourself to be vulnerable and admitting that you need help is not a weakness. It takes great strength and courage to admit that you need help. I also go to therapy as a way to cope with the trauma that I've had to face in my past. I know I've talked about this before, and I'm very open about it, but I was in a past relationship with a man who shared very similar traits to Chris. To his social circle, he was an incredibly friendly guy. He was accommodating, and he was always willing to lend a helping hand. But when he was behind closed doors, he was a different person entirely. He was an abuser, and he had total disregard for his family and their well-being. Yes, I'm sure in my videos I appear carefree and silly, and for the most part I am, but it's taken a lot of therapeutic work to get here. I had felt like a very broken person after that relationship. So, to everyone watching, if you need to hear this, it's okay to ask for help if you're suffering mental health issues. It's not shameful, and it should not be seen any differently than visiting a doctor or another professional for a physical ailment. I think this author did a really fabulous job of differentiating the terms for sociopath, psychopaths, and narcissists, because I think in the media sometimes those terms can get misconstrued and we tend to lump them all together, but she did a really good job of picking apart each one and explaining how Chris may have fit into a certain mold. It almost helps us understand how a monster's brain functions. I know that this video dealt with a lot of darker content than it usually does, but I'm glad that I could share this story, and I'm glad that I could share this book with you. I hope that you guys check it out if you're interested in true crime stories, but just be aware that it does get a little graphic. This book is available on Kindle Unlimited, so if you're a KU subscriber, you can read this book for free. So this time, if you have any true crime stories you want me to read, let me know, and I would love to check them out. I hope you guys like this video. If you did, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. And if you like books and makeup like I do, then don't forget to subscribe to my channel. I hope you guys have a great rest of your week. Y'all stay safe out there. Read a damn book, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.